Robert Mugabe, the former president of Zimbabwe, has died. He was 95 years old. He'd been ill for some time.
Mr. Mugabe was president from 1987 until he was forced from office in 2017. The early successes of his time have been overshadowed by the economic decline of that country. Shingaini Oka looks back at his life.
He was once Zimbabwe's liberator, leading a war against white minority rule. But by the end, the adulation President Robert Mugabe once enjoyed was gone. He cemented his power, winning overwhelmingly at elections in 1980. As leader of a new nation, he set about creating a better country than the one he inherited. And for a while, he succeeded.
There can never be any return to the state of armed conflict which existed before our commitment to peace and the democratic process of election under the Lancaster House Agreement. Surely, this is now time to beat our swords into plowshares.
But beneath the veneer lay a dark side. Mr. Mugabe deployed a crack military unit to southern Zimbabwe to deal with hundreds of insurgents. Between 1983 and 1987, thousands were murdered, and the world turned a blind eye. In 2008, in the midst of billion% inflation and widespread unemployment, Mr. Mugabe suffered his first electoral defeat. It only led to more violence in the second round of voting. Britain stripped him of his knighthood, but he remained a cult-like figure among many Africans for daring to challenge Western political dominance on the world's affairs. But within his own party, discontent was rising. Many believed he had overstayed and needed to hand over power. His second wife, Grace Mugabe, 40 years his junior, seemed to be gaining power, and she began accusing then Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa of trying to oust them. Mr. Mugabe finally fired his longtime aide, accusing him of trying to topple him. Mr. Mnangagwa, with the help of the military, mounted a comeback, posting soldiers on the streets and placing Mr. Mugabe under house arrest. Tens of thousands of Zimbabweans marched, calling on him to step down. And after the threat of impeachment, he resigned. In his last years, Mr. Mugabe had retreated to the seclusion of his mansion. Many will remember him as a gifted orator and visionary who liberated Zimbabwe, but later returned her to the shackles of oppression.
From our correspondent Shingai Nioka. So reaction this morning to the fact that Robert Mugabe, notorious, controversial president of Zimbabwe, his death has been announced. He was 95 years old. We understand that he died in hospital in Singapore, where he'd been treated for the last couple of years. And it's fascinating looking at the reaction this morning. Once fated as a war hero, as a liberator of his country, as a pan-African leader, the kind of leader that African nations should be aiming for, should be proud of, and then later his reputation in ruins, his country partly destroyed, his economy in tatters, human rights trashed, and that conflict in the way in which he will be remembered is everywhere this morning. But he was 95 years old, and we've reflected on his life here and on his legacy. People talking about his personal charm and yet the way in which he sometimes terrorised those who were against him, and the way in which Britain, you see there where he met the Queen, was often caught in this conflicted situation about how to treat him, how to deal with him, particularly in the later years of his rule. The death of Robert Mugabe announced this morning.